ในช่วงเปลี่ยนผ่านทางการเมืองที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นในประเทศไทยที่มีกิจกรรมทางการเมืองเกิดขึ้นมากมายนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นการปฏิรูปการร่างรัฐธรรมนูญรวมถึงการเดินหน้าดึงภาคประชาชนเข้ามามีส่วนร่วมในการปฏิรูปประเทศเป็นช่วงหนึ่งที่ประเทศไทยผู้ที่ทำงานต่างๆเกี่ยวกับภาคส่วนทางการเมืองก็พยายามที่จะหาองค์ความรู้หาต้นแบบจากนานาประเทศด้วยนะคะเพื่อมาประยุกต์เข้ากับสังคมไทยค่ะหนึ่งในองค์กรที่ทำงานก็คือองค์กรมูลนิธิฟิดริกเนามันนะคะเป็นองค์กรที่ไม่แสวงหาผลกำไรและทำงานเพื่อที่จะส่งเสริมประชาธิปไตยแบบมีส่วนร่วมเสรีประชาธิปไตยหลักนิติรัฐและหลักนิติธรรมแนวคิดที่เกิดขึ้นที่ประเทศเยอรมนีที่คนไทยบางส่วนพูดถึงจะนำมาประยุกต์ใช้ได้กับประเทศไทยมากน้อยแค่ไหนมีข้อดีข้อเสียจุดแข็งจุดอ่อนอย่างไรนะคะวันนี้ดิฉันจะคุยกับคุณซิกฟรีดเฮโซกค่ะผู้อำนวยการส่วนภูมิภาคมูลนิธิฟิดริกเนามันค่ะ Thank you for joining me Mr. Herzog
Thank you so much
You have been advocating for democracy for many years on behalf of FNF Can you tell me which country has the best democracy in the world
Oh that's a tough one I don't think that there is one country that has the best. We have a whole range of democratic countries in the world, but each one has a different system. There are no two democratic systems that are alike, because the culture, the preferences of the people, they all shape a different democracy. So you have some democracies that are very strongly established, where the democratic spirit is strong. Let's say Great Britain. But Britain is relatively weak in local government. You look at local government, Germany, Switzerland, the United States have a very strong tradition of local government. Then you have parliamentary systems that work well in having stable governments. You have countries like Switzerland, which has a very strong tradition of referendums. So many people look at Switzerland as a model because people can overturn laws with referendums. So it has a more direct democracy.
But to look at those healthy democracies, what are key components that you can tell us that will make up healthy, vibrant democracy?
I think one is that the principle, we elect our leaders and we have a say, we take a responsibility for our community where that principle is lived and is a daily reality. So a democracy lives from people's involvement. And not just every 4 years at the ballot box, but also in daily life, in their communities, in their municipalities. So the most vibrant democracies are often those who also have a strong democracy at the local level. Or conversely, a strong tradition of local democracy can help build a national democracy. I worked for some years on Bangladesh. Bangladesh has a long tradition of local government. It's now building a democracy, and the strength of the democracy draws a bit from that tradition of local government. Then an important factor that has been there for a long time is civil society. A vibrant civil society is usually a key factor. Are people allowed to organize? Can they manage their own affairs? Do they do things on their own without waiting for the government to solve problems?
So then it has to be channeled in from daily life of people to bring in democracy.
Exactly. It has to have its seat in the hearts of the people, in the daily reality of the people. It's not just something that happens in the capital. It has to be something that people can relate to also with their daily experience. And then, of course, it needs these, in a sense, separation of powers, the constraints on power. After all, when we give government power, power means also the power to coerce. That's something that has an inherent risk. So we want to make sure that that power is used sensibly and with certain constraints. So dividing power between different actors with independent institutions like the judiciary, maybe an election commission on audits, and also a division between, of course, legislature, government, judiciary, and maybe also a horizontal one between national government, regional governments, provincial governments, and municipalities.
What's the situation in Southeast Asia, East Asia? That's your focus at the moment.
Yes, and it's a very exciting region, and I have a personal interest in it because my wife is from the Philippines. This is a region actually that has given the world a real wave of democracy. I would say starting with the toppling of the Marcos dictatorship in '86, and then the failed revolution in Myanmar, then later on the democratic change in Thailand, then the democracy coming to Indonesia, that you have a whole wave of democratic change in Southeast Asia.
Is it changing for worse or better?
I'm an optimist. I believe it's, on the whole, it's changing for the better. But one thing we have learned, these things are not easy. Just changing a system or bringing in a new constitution is only the beginning. If we think of democracy in terms of really a lived reality, that takes time to really take root. It takes time for various, maybe also changes in government to work out the practical problems. And there are always dangers of backlashes, because a democracy, that's at first it's just a change in the rules of the game. But how do you live those rules? If you have a society that's still very traditional, where political families, where family clans hold a lot of power, where the society is organized like it's been since centuries along personal loyalties, patronage lines, then to change that to a more open system where people compete more freely.
That seems to be the main character of Southeast Asia, isn't it? To have political clan, political family. It's
been the character of the world over. This is not something that is unique to Southeast Asia. You had political families in Europe as well. So these are, Douglas North, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, has worked on this, and he basically said that was the natural state of humanity. So to evolve, to change that into a more open system, not just in politics, also in the economy, that takes time, and it's a long process.
If you really just focus on Southeast Asia, because in Thailand, in Thai society, we now talk a lot about ASEAN community. We can learn from each other. What's the country that do you think can be role model of democracy in Southeast Asia?
And if we broaden it a little bit to democracy, also the system of rule of law, institutions and market economy, then we can also look at Singapore, which doesn't have a political democracy, but it has a relatively strong judiciary. So people's property rights are well protected. The Philippines has a more vibrant democracy with a strong local government. So I like that a lot. But in the Philippines, the judiciary is weak, and so bad behavior, bad governance doesn't get punished easily. Indonesia, again, has had an astonishing democratic transformation, has tried a relatively strong decentralization, is managing in some ways a conservative Muslim society to combine that with the democracy in a huge country. That is, again, an interesting example. And Thailand, of course, has built a rather modern economy and has in some ways a relatively stable social system, but when it comes to constitutional development, a lot of churning, a lot of debate, a lot of searching. So I don't think there's one model that we all follow the Philippines or we all follow Indonesia.
So Thailand has to find its own path.
Yes.
For political reform, for political transition, which is happening at this juncture.
Yes, I believe so.
So far, what can you see as the strength of Thailand to move forward to political reform?
I think the strength of Thailand is really the willingness to take a step back from confrontation and try to look for a common ground, to find, I think, and it might come, I'm relatively new to the country, so I want to be a bit cautious in what I say, but I think it also comes from the Buddhist ethos that asks people to find the middle path, the path of moderation, not going into extremes. So that, I think, is a strong ethos that one can tap into, to find compromise, to find, to take that search for a common ground, for a consensus.
And we are now in the process of drafting constitution, and model of German electoral system has been raised up that perhaps it is suitable for Thailand that we can think of.
I think when you look just at the way we elect our national parliament, that is certainly adaptable, but it's also a complicated system. So even Germans themselves are sometimes confused because it has two votes. You have a vote for a constituency, and you have a vote for the national party list. But the important vote is the second vote, the vote for the party list. That determines the number of seats that your party gets. And then which members go, that is dependent on who won a constituency. So you win, let's say you have 100 seats in parliament, all in total. Your party wins 40% of the vote, of the list vote, so it gets 40 seats. And then you look how many constituencies did you win. You won 30 constituencies, so these 30 people get elected plus the first 10 on your list.
But do you think that can prevent winner takes all, or can the German electoral system help prevent that?
The German system, I mean, that depends really on the voters. In Germany, in the history since 1949, we only had one situation where one party won more than 50%. In all other instances, they had to have a coalition. So in that sense, yes, our system encourages coalition governments and doesn't tend to have a winner takes all. By contrast, in India, which is the British system, you have now a government that won an absolute majority with only 30% of the vote. So that is a huge winner takes all effect that comes with first past the post. So ours is really a proportional representation system, which makes absolute majorities very difficult and which usually forces parties to form a coalition. But it has, with the constituencies, the advantage is you have a local member. You have a member that represents your part of the country. If you have a pure PR system, then the party leaders in the capital will just draw up a list, and it might not be representative of the whole country, or the people who are there might not have a strong link to their party. So that's why this combination to us made a lot of sense. Whether it's practical for Thailand, whether that is something for Thais to decide.
What's the ingredient of success in terms of politics and economy of Germany?
I think when I look at the economy, and I'm an economist, so I like talking about that, I see two elements. One is that after World War II, we built a very strong open market economy. When other countries opted for a more mixed economy with a strong role for the government, for the state, with many state-owned industries, Germany opted for a very open system. So we've become very strong believers in free trade, and we rebuilt our economy through exports, through integration in the global market. And we were grateful to the Americans at the time for opening their markets and for opening the world market. So Germany has really come back after the defeat and after the destruction of the war through an export-oriented economy. And Thailand has done something similar. We also believe that this open market system is necessary because competition is really what drives economies forward. That also, in a sense, make sure that not one group gets too dominant. Because our businessmen have to compete not just with other German businessmen, they have to compete with other Europeans and indeed with global businesses. So you have less of a concentration of economic power with a few big companies. Our real strength is in the small and medium enterprise sector. The real backbone of the German economy is the small and medium enterprise sector. We know, of course, Mercedes and Bosch and Siemens, but the real employment generator are the small companies who are often world market leaders in their very specialized field. That's one. The second is vocational training system, which is basically done as a public-private partnership with the private sector, the chambers of commerce telling the government what to teach in government schools and having a strong curriculum in the company for the vocational trainees. So they take 2 or 3 years, go through the different parts of a company and learn their stuff both practically and in a state school. That has given us a very competent workforce, a very highly educated, very skilled workforce, which you need for a modern manufacturing economy.
And how do you prepare people to be aware or to participate in politics in Germany?
Through a mixture. One is, as I mentioned, our strong system of local government and civil society. And civil society has to be run according to democratic principles. So people get trained in democracy from an early age. The second thing is that we do a lot of civic education in the schools and outside schools. And in the schools, it's not just the education department, but there's also autonomous institutes for civic education, both at the national level and at the state levels. And we have the so-called political foundations who also do civic education, who are representing sort of the different streams of thought in parliament. And you have other organizations like private foundations or like the churches and others who also do civic education. So and you have adult education systems in most cities. So if you are, even if you are in a small town like my hometown, 34,000 inhabitants, it will have a sort of adult education program. And you can go to classes on political systems, on civic issues.
It's in every parts and parcels of the society.
Yes.
And people can have independent activity on politics. And who
Yes.
teach who? Do you have to get political experts to come and lecture for people, or people just learn among themselves?
I think it's both. People learn among themselves. Just when you are a member of a society, let's say a music club or a sports club, you learn about politics a bit, because who's going to be the club president, who's going to run the affairs of the club. There's a political competition going on. But then you also get the chance to listen to political leaders. For example, of course, during election campaigns, but even outside, people will hold public forums, parties will hold public forums, other groups will hold public forums on various issues, and apart from, of course, the mass media that reports on that. But even in the daily life of a community, of a municipality, you get a lot of exposure if you're interested. Of course, if you're not interested, no matter how many programs you have, you don't reach those. But those who are interested have a lot.
Do you think people feel under pressure that they really have to participate politically, or it's their second nature?
I would say it's both. There is a certain pressure, a certain social pressure, especially among the older generation, that voting, a certain engagement is a civic duty. And this comes from our history with the Nazi dictatorship. People sort of took a learning from that. If you don't take an interest in politics, it can go really, really wrong, and then you pay for it. Because those people who didn't care about the rise of a fascist party to power later on had to send their sons to war and saw their houses bombed. So the consequences of bad politics in Germany became very real. So people after the war became sort of a bit more conscious that we have to make this work, and we can't just sit back and let others do it. You know, time goes on, the history gets slowly forgotten, and so the younger generation doesn't have that sort of awareness anymore. My parent generation lived through the war, so for me, I grew up with the stories of the war and what happens if things go wrong. So that gives you more of a motivation to get involved. For the younger generation that takes prosperity and peace for granted, the motivation is a bit more difficult to generate, because the motivation really comes from the knowledge this is not guaranteed. Peace, prosperity is not guaranteed. We have to work for it, and it won't succeed if we don't get involved.
As the more economically advanced Germany has become, do you think the awareness or political momentum among people has been lessened?
Yes, I think so, and it shows to some extent in the participation in elections. Fewer people go to vote. Fewer people become members of political parties. So there is a certain slackening of the interest. And I don't want to be too judgmental. Sometimes people say, this is a sign of a mature democracy. In America, a lot of people don't bother to vote, or in Britain, because people say we're happy with the system. On the other hand, there is a danger of complacency, and that and if something goes wrong, if there suddenly is a crisis, then people can get radicalized. And we see that at the moment. We had the economic crisis, we had the euro crisis, so you suddenly in Europe see a rise of very anti-immigrant and far-right parties, which is worrying. And where you say we've forgotten the lessons of history, and we've forgotten the lessons that our prosperity was built on an open system, not on a closed one.
What do you think Thai people can learn from German experience in terms of civic participation, civic engagement in political process?
I think the one lesson is indeed that it's everybody's task, that we all have to be involved, and that we can all make a difference at different levels. It doesn't always have to be the national politics, it can also be at the local level, in the community. And that people can make a real difference, that they don't necessarily have to wait for the government to solve their issues for them. that they can make a contribution, that they can sort out a lot of things on their own. For that, of course, they also have to be given the space and the freedom to act on that.
You mean among different groups of people in different communities at different levels, they can just form up and form a dialogue for create their own space?
Yes, form a dialogue, but maybe also engage more with civil society in civil associations to do something practical in their locality. And the other, I think, is really the spirit of a certain consensus, a certain willingness to build an inclusive system, to agree on basic rules of the game. This happened after World War II when our different parties sat together to write the constitution, and they had strong debates in the Constitutional Convention at the time. The ideas about the economy went from market economy, open market economy, all the way to planned economy. So they decided, well, we leave that open. We leave that to the political process. We fix certain principles. We fix the principle of property right. We agree on basic human rights. We agree on how the political process is going to be structured, the electoral system, the roles of the different actors, and the rest we leave to politics. So it was a short constitution. It was one that concentrated on the basics. It, of course, also reflected our experience with Nazi Germany, so we made a very strong catalogue of basic fundamental rights. But a lot of questions were left to politics. So the Social Democrats said, okay, we won't insist on having all sorts of social legislation in the Constitution. We'll fix that once we win the election. We leave that to the political process. Then it turns out they didn't win the election, and instead the Christian Democrats and the Liberals created a more free market system. But the basic spirit of the people who drafted the Constitution was, let's create a system that we can all live with, that will give us the space to interact, to live out our vision, and to compete peacefully.
Why is dialogue so important? Because there may be some arguments that to sit down, having dialogue, it's just like people coming to tell their situation, exchange information, but it doesn't really lead to any solution, any conclusion.
I think in Germany, of course, at the time it worked because we had gone through such a horrible experience. So there's a different motivation. You want to build something new. So that was an exceptional situation. But more generally, the task is still to create the right frame of mind for dialogue. And the right frame of mind is, how do we envisage the country in 20 years? And on that you can very often agree. This is what we've tried to do also in these forums, that you step back a bit from the day-to-day issues and think, how do we want the country to look in 20 years? And then you can agree we want it to be more prosperous. And what will happen? More of economic development, maybe more of industrialization, more of urbanization. That probably most people can agree. Then you work backwards and say, okay, what needs to happen that we get there? And what would it take for you to come along? What does it take for me to come along?
In the dialogue, the local community should invite government representatives or representative of any organization or public sector to really participate and listen to civil society.
It can be either way around. When you talk about it can be when you talk about the long-term vision of the country, it can be civil society getting together and saying, okay, this is our vision, and we just propose it in a constructive way. I think that is what has been happening in these forums that Thai PBS has done, where civil society says, let's just get together and formulate our vision and offer it to the rest of society. Whether they take it up or not is then their decision. You're not responsible for that, but you make an offer, you make a constructive offer. Not by attacking someone, but by saying, look, we're at a crucial juncture, we have to make a few important decisions. We think these might be good ideas.
What's the difference between having active people to participate and not having people's engagement at all? What would be the difference?
I think when you write a constitution is supposed to be the foundational document of a country. It's the basic rules of the game. For that you need broad agreement. How one gets that agreement, that is, there are different ways. You can draft it and then have a referendum, or you can draft it and consult. So there's no hard and fast rule how to do it. But I think the basic principle is that such a basic document needs ideally needs broad buy-in, broad consensus. Say, okay, these are rules that we can live with, that we will like. So I think that that is the experience of constitution writing. The actual constitution writing is often done by a small group. The question is, where do they come from? Where does this constitutional process come from? And there one can look at the different countries that have written constitutions. There are X number of processes.
From your opinion, what's your concern about Thailand in this transition period?
I think the concern is really that there has been a certain degree of polarization and conflict, and is the society able to move beyond that and find a new consensus, a new, more inclusive social contract that also is maybe flexible enough to allow the country to move forward, to resolve conflicts in future with less, let's say, with less drama, and maybe also avoid too much concentrations of power, and that allow more people to really participate. So this is very abstract because I've been here too short, so I don't want to comment on details. But I think the broad issue is really that in a situation of polarization and conflict, can we move beyond that and arrive at a new consensus and see we all have a stake in this? It's not a zero-sum game. If we work together, we can make the country better for all of us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herzog, for joining me. Thank you very much. เป็นความเห็นจากคุณซิกฟรีด เฮซกนะคะผู้อำนวยการส่วนภูมิภาคมูลนิธิฟริดริก เนามันค่ะถึงแนวทางการพัฒนาประชาธิปไตยในโลกเสรีประชาธิปไตยนะคะแนวทางที่เกิดขึ้นอยู่กับบริบทของแต่ละประเทศนะคะรวมถึงประเทศไทยซึ่งขณะนี้กำลังอยู่ในช่วงหัวเลี้ยวหัวต่อของการทำงานเพื่อปฏิรูปทางการเมืองการร่างรัฐธรรมนูญเพราะฉะนั้นก็อาจจะเป็นหนึ่งในข้อมูลที่นำมาถอดบทเรียนเพื่อที่จะเกิดขึ้นกับประเทศไทยได้นะคะสิ่งสำคัญที่คุณเฮซกเน้นก็คือการมีส่วนร่วมของภาคพลเมืองที่จะเข้ามาแสดงความคิดเห็นนำไปสู่การหาทางออกร่วมกันค่ะเพื่อสร้างอนาคตร่วมกันสำหรับประเทศไทยค่ะทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์และที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินราตรีสวัสดิ์ค่ะ